name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Eternal God, I pray to you for all those you have given me, to love with a special love and with special concern. Let them be illumined by your light. Let all imperfection be taken from them, so that in truth they may work in your garden where you have assigned them to work. I commend to you those whom you have put on my shoulders. You commission me to keep them awake, me who am always sleeping. Wake them up yourself, kind and compassionate Father, so that the eyes of their understanding may always be wide awake in you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, hey everybody, I'm trying out a new camera today. I'm actually having to redo this lecture. I lost it because the file was corrupted. So the original one I did last week, but this one is actually being done the day before. It's going to be posted, so that's a little different. I normally like to do them a little bit more in advance, but this is the lecture for April the 7th, Tuesday of Holy Week, and it's for the junior class, and we are going to be talking about the end of chapter 24 and chapter 25. Now, interestingly enough, chapter 25 is one of the longer chapters, but it doesn't have a lot of thematic content. A lot happens because it describes a sea battle, but it's not one of those chapters that has a lot of, shall we say, things that are important in terms of discussing it along the lines of the greater plot. One of the interesting things, though, about talking about chapter 25 is because before we can get into it, I'd like to just do a quick review of something, because one of the things that I was told by a student recently is that sometimes they get confused about chapter numbers when they look at the Roman numerals. So just in case you don't know, let's do a quick decision of how Roman numerals work. Okay. So as we know, right, 1, 2, 3. All of this pretty simple, right? But if you are a little confused about Roman numerals, this is where sometimes people get confused. This is 5, right? And this is 6, right, to have the one after. But this is 4, right, to have the one before, right? That's the way you do 5. Of course, you probably know how to do, 50 is L, right? X is 10, right? Now L is 50, and I believe C is 100 in Roman numerals, right? So that's why the way they do Roman numerals, when they got to Super Bowl 40, right? That's why it was Super Bowl XL, right? Because just like the way in a Roman numeral, when you write 4, you put the 1 in front of the 5, indicating that it's 5 minus 1, right? Super Bowl XL is not 10 plus 50, it's 50 minus 10. And I know that can be a little, a little confusing, but just so that you know, so in this case, right, this would be XX1, then the V, right? That would be 24, and that would be 25, just in case any of you were having a disagreement about that. Okay, one of the more important parts of the book, and I didn't cover this when we talked about chapter 24, because chapter 25 is a little light on thematic content, so I wanted to keep it a little bit more balanced, is they talked about this idea of morality and sentimentality. This is a very big argument that Maud and Van Weyden and Larson have at the end of chapter 24. Basically, as we know, they've argued about things as right and wrong, the possession of the money, not of grammar, of ethics, but of fact, right? The idea is that all of the moral feelings that both Maud Brewster and Humphrey Van Weyden has, Wolf Larson express is mere, that just means only, right? Sentiment. Now, sentiment refers to feelings, right? And when someone refers someone as being sentimental, it's usually, or when something is just sentiment, oftentimes it's a way to insult talking about feelings. When you say something is only sentimental, that means oftentimes it's referring to it being without reason or without evidence. The key idea for Wolf Larson, because as we remember, Wolf Larson is a materialist, right? We may remember that about him. He believes there's one kind of stuff, right? And as a materialist, right, he doesn't necessarily believe in things like God or the soul or other things related to that. And as a materialist, when Humphrey and Maude are talking about good and evil, right, and they talk about the good things in life, what he says is good and evil, when he says they're based on sentiment, are based only on feelings and not hard evidence. Inside the human being, we all may feel like we have a conscience, a sense of right and wrong. But the thing is that if someone asks, what makes a person good? What is the way in which we measure goodness? Or what is the way in which we measure beauty? This becomes very, very difficult for someone who is of a empirical mindset, right? Or a scientific mindset, right? That bases everything on the senses, because you may know there is no unit of beauty, not like the way there is, or there is no unit of goodness like there is in science. Now, when I say unit, right, we know that anytime we ever want to talk about something critically, we need to have some kind of criterion, right? Some kind of measure, right, in order to discuss it objectively, right? So if I were to ask, one of you, how much do you weigh, right? You can't just say, well, I'm light or I'm heavy. In order to have a more meaningful or a conversation where we really know what we're talking about, we have some kind of objective standard by which we can measure. So for example, if I got on a scale, right, and it said, you weigh, say 235 pounds or something like that, right? That's something that we can measure and we can come to an agreement upon, because we can use pounds as a firm, standard of measurement, right? And we can do the same with anything that's scientific, whether it be length, right? There's a standard meter, when it comes to volume, there are standards for that. There are all of these ways in which things, right, scientifically, empirically, can be measured, right? But how do we measure beauty and goodness? There is no distinct metric measurement for goodness or beauty. We do that through the heart. We do that through kind of what corresponds with our soul and our innate sense of good and evil. And this was linked to, the transcendentals, right? What corresponds to our inner sense of beauty, truth, and goodness, right? This all goes back to the beginning of the semester, right? These are all ideas that we talked about. Remember, so a criterion is a standard of measure. These are the transcendentals. And ultimately, generally, we evaluate goodness and beauty about whether or not it corresponds to our natural sense of beauty, truth, and goodness. But for the materialist who doesn't believe in transcendentals, who doesn't believe in beauty, truth, or goodness as realities that transcend time and space, right? They ask, well, show me the hard evidence for goodness, right? Show me 1 gram of ethics, right? You can't go order a pound of beauty anywhere, right? And so because of that, anytime, they say, well, we have these feelings of, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. It violates their innate sense of right and wrong. One of the things that Wolf Larsen keeps saying is, show me your right and wrong. Where is the actual scientific evidence for these ideas of right and wrong that you have? One of the more famous talking heads right now is this guy by the name of Ben Shapiro. He's kind of the young darling of conservatives, and he loves to say, facts don't care about your feelings. Right? That's a very common thing that sometimes people like to say. This is a typical thing that someone who is an empiricist, someone who wants hard evidence, might say. The thing is, though, is traditionally a lot of the things in which that we hold dear aren't based upon things that can be measured quantitatively, right? Because that's the difference, because science, right? Science, oftentimes, when we talk about grams or liters or length, right? That's something that we can measure, according to quantity, how much. But to understand something according to quality, right? That is a little bit more difficult to measure. Now, I'm not saying there are not standards of quality that exist. For example, right, when I make videos, you can tell what videos have higher resolution and don't by their appearance. There are still certain things that can be measured in terms of quantity. But when we talk about qualities of axiology, right, that means, ethics and aesthetics, the study of beauty, right? Any time of discussion of quality always appeals to something that's inside the human person, right? As Maud rightly says, the innate sense, the heart, right? And the thing is that Wolf Larson and many other materialists, they often are saying, well, no, you have to give me some evidence for it. Tell me, who's to say that your standard of goodness or beauty, what makes them good? And he says that feelings, and by this, right, Wolf Larson is quoting Schopenhauer, right? Schopenhauer suggests, we said that he was one of the philosophers that this book was going to be a critique of, that most love and morality are deceptions of the culture and of primitive impulses. And when he says primitive impulses, he's referring to feelings, right? And what Schopenhauer is saying, and what Wolf Larson is echoing in this text, is the idea that why should we make any decisions based upon feelings if feelings don't correspond to anything except our interior state? And why can't I just choose to feel about anything any way I want to feel about it? One of the more interesting, famous works of the 20th century, which is going to come after this book, but it is partly influenced by this book, is by an existentialist by the name of Albert Camus is how you say it in the French, and he wrote this book called The Stranger, right? And in this book, The Stranger, right, it's basically about someone who doesn't have a normal sense of empathy, the same way Wolf Larson does not have a normal sense of empathy. And he's accused of murder and sentenced to death, and the main reason why people think he's guilty of this murder is because he didn't feel any sorrow when his mother died, right? They just assumed he was evil because this character didn't feel any sorrow from where his mother died. The thing is that generally speaking, empathy, right? Empathy, which, refers to feeling the feelings of another, right, comes from pathos, right? Which means feeling. If you use an emotional appeal, it's one of the rhetorical appeals, right? Appeal to pathos. Empathy is one of those things that connects us as human beings. The general idea of empathy as a universal human value for good is we oftentimes relate to each other in things that go a little bit beyond language. If someone says, why do you find this piece of music beautiful? Why do you find this waterfall beautiful? Why do you find, just any of these different things that we find beautiful? It can be very difficult to put into words in an empirical or a scientific way, right? It can be very difficult to just say, look, I have this internal natural reaction to this phenomenon, and this is just normal behavior, and we all kind of understand it. One thing that most of us have in common is one of the most disturbing sounds that most of us can hear is the sound of a baby crying, right? If we hear a baby crying, we need to know what's going on. We need to do something about it. We're biologically hardwired to go and seek out and resolve the sound of a baby in distress. That's part of our natural empathy. But one of the things that Schopenhauer says and Wolf Larson echoes is a lot of these natural impulses lead us to act contrary to our better interests. And what I mean better interests is, right, for example, right, if you are moved by beauty to marry a woman, according to Schopenhauer, and then you marry her, then she's not going to be beautiful for very long, and you're going to be taking care of her if you marry her the rest of your life, right? And Schopenhauer says, why should you do that? You're making a decision based upon feelings, and you've just been duped, right? And by the way, it's not the worst advice. If you're going to marry someone who's beautiful on the outside and the inside. That way they're still beautiful when you're both 70, right? But the key idea, it's getting to 1440, so let me start a new video here.